As we move to the last session, I'm actually going to invite some of the panel back, I think. But there's a Hebrew and Israeli song which is called Kol Ha'olam Kulo, which means the whole world is a very narrow bridge. And what's fitting about that song, given that we're talking about the theme of bridges, is that the second part of the song says, don't stress, you don't have to do the whole job yourself. It's a team effort, it's an ecosystem effort. And for the last and concluding session, please welcome to the stage Eti Levy, Israel Trade Commissioner again, who's going to chair the next panel. And I'll be inviting back to the stage Avik Hasson, Paul Bassett, the Honorary Wyatt Roy, and bringing back John Medved, if John's in the house. Hi, Johnny. Okay. John. And please give a special welcome to Andrew Penn, CEO of Telstra. Good to see you.
So Nathan, if I would have known about your cards, I would have prepared the yes and no questions. This is the closing panel for today. We've had a very action-packed day, and therefore I would like to start with a very direct question. The name of the panel is Scaling Up the Relations between Israel and Australia. What should we do to enhance the relations? And maybe we could start with you, Wyatt, since you just came back from a visit to Israel.
It's great. It's great to see all my friends here as well. It is, look, I think there is enormous opportunities. I think by partnering and collaborating in the way that we expect our entrepreneurs to collaborate in the ecosystem, when countries do that, you see an enormous uptick in innovation. I think we have a lot to learn from Israel, and there are great investment opportunities, but I also think Israel has an enormous opportunity by partnering with us, particularly as that beachhead into Asia, where I was saying before, 1 billion people coming into the middle class. We have access that nobody else has into that Asian marketplace. By partnering and using us, not thinking of us as a marketplace of 24 million people, but 1 billion people in the middle class in Asia, there's so much potential there. There are very practical things that I think the government will be doing very shortly that will help our two countries partner and collaborate on innovation. And Christopher Pine, the Senior Minister, is heading to Israel in a few short weeks, and I think there'll be another big step then.
Okay. Thank you. Andy, this question is addressed to you. So we've had 2 delegations of Telstra going to Israel in the last few weeks, including yourself, and we'd love to hear a bit about your experience. But I had a chat with the venture teams after they came back from their trip, and they had a week in Israel. They saw more than 40 companies, and I think one of their conclusions was that they should really go to Israel at least 3 times a year, which is excellent. So when you hear that from your teams as Telstra, do you have any future plans for strengthening the relations with Israel?
Yes, look, I think absolutely. I mean, one of the things that struck me was just the depth of the talent and the breadth of the whole sort of ecosystem, because one of the things that I've observed is that you've got to create an infrastructure right the way across the ecosystem. We made an investment in China in 2007 when we bought into a company called AutoHome, which is basically an online marketplace for new cars. And when we invested in the company, we invested, it was a relatively small amount of money in the scheme of things. The company had 20 employees. It was sort of almost pre-revenue. Today, that company is listed on the New York Stock Exchange with a market cap of $6 billion, and the chief executive is still the same chief executive. And I was having an interesting conversation with him 12 months ago about something called Sarbanes-Oxley. And the point of the story is that it is a very significant. Not only do you need the financial infrastructure from pre-revenue all the way through to sophisticated global capital markets, but you also need the mentoring infrastructure to actually help a young entrepreneurial young entrepreneurial business person to actually sort of make that whole transition to today, where James Quinn, who's the CEO, is the CEO of a very large, significant New York Stock Exchange publicly limited company, and it's a big transition, and that's one of the things that I certainly admired in Israel, and something that I think we've got to sort of build out aspects of our ecosystem in Australia. But certainly in terms of a destination for capital, a market of great talent, particularly in certain specialist areas in cybersecurity. Obviously, you guys are really at a cut above, and that is an area of critical importance for both Telstra and I think many nations around the world. So we'll certainly be doing a lot more.
Thank you. John, I'll address this question to you. So you're one of the first Israeli VCs to have a presence in Australia. And I'm really interested to hear from you what brought you to Australia. And
you've got to be kidding. I mean, it's so
beside
obvious.
the beautiful.
I'm joking. Look, this is a wonderful place. Who doesn't like Australia? Who are your enemies? I mean, the worst you get is like the All Blacks and the Kiwis. Those aren't enemies, right? I mean, that's you're lovable, and I think you're also going to grow really, really fast. And so we've been blessed here because I guess we discovered it. It's a long way, but I'm sort of a glutton for punishment, glutton for other things as well, and got here, and we have 1,000 investors now on our platform, and we have 50 million Aussie dollars later invested, and we're just getting started. And you guys, because of the new government and the new Prime Minister, this is going to be such a dramatic couple of years. There's just no question about it. I was just talking to Terence from PwC about the venture numbers, and I was wrong. I said earlier this morning that there was $200 million invested this year in Aussie venture, and it looks like 150 according to Terence. So Israel's about 100 times per capita this year. That will not last, right? The numbers here are going to go up dramatically, and we want to take advantage of it. So when you ask 3 or 4 critical things that can be done, one is more funds like SquarePeg, okay, with professional investors who are going to be investing in both ecosystems. Couldn't be better. Okay, more delegations, of which there are going to be a lot. I mean, for crying out loud, there's nobody left in Israel this week. You've got the whole ecosystem here. Okay. Number 3 is we've got to engage from Israel with more of your companies as proof of concept and as initial sort of proof cases, because you're just about the right size. You're approachable. We can get into these companies, and you're big enough to try scale, but you're not so big that we can break a lot of stuff, and that's important. And then finally, as a financial center, you guys are sitting on $2 trillion of capital. Let's get going here. Okay, we've got the great innovation. You've got going to add that great innovation, and together I think we're just going to rock and roll. I'm excited.
Right. So you've got a great portfolio of company. Are you pushing them to look at Australia as a place for better site, pilots?
Absolutely. First of all, many of our companies are already doing business in Australia. We've made 2 investments in Australia, and we're looking for more, so please send in your business plans. And, we've been talking to all kinds of Australian companies about how we can engage with our companies. And I think what Wyatt said before about the beachhead to Asia is perfect. This is a place, first of all, Israelis, when they come abroad and they start setting up their outposts, you got to send the kids to a school. And with all due respect, I love Hong Kong and I love Singapore and I love, they're going to want to send them in the eastern suburbs or somewhere in Melbourne and Caulfield, okay? And that's going to be a lure for Israeli companies who are going to want to come and set up shop here. So I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, and I know it's competition, but what would be your recommendation for other Israeli VCs looking at having a presence here in Australia?
They're here.
No, not today at the bridge, but an actual presence.
Better than JPT and Henry and iAngels and all these great people who are here. Okay, and the ones who aren't here are the ones who are, as we say in Hebrew, mifasfes. They're the ones who are missing it. Okay, and the word's going to get out. And this is, Eti, you deserve a huge round of applause, because the fact that we have this
I didn't ask him to say that.
no, but this kind of event is what builds this relationship. You ask me what works, more of this.
Thank you. So we'll move from an Israeli VC that has a presence in Australia to an Australian VC that has a presence in Israel. And Paul, you're the first, the pioneer in terms of Australian VCs having a presence in Israel. And I'd love to hear from your experience and especially your recommendation to others that are here today.
Sure. Our first chairman at Seek used to say pioneers get arrows in their ass. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we want to be described as a pioneer, but we'll go with it. It's interesting for us. We're sort of 18 months into the journey, and the quality of the thing that's most striking for me about the entrepreneurs and the people we've met in the Israeli ecosystem, pound for pound, Israeli entrepreneurs have no peer. Now, in the Bay Area, there's obviously a far, far larger pool of entrepreneurs. It's just a larger pool of people, and the best are typically the very best on the planet. And we're talking about a handful of businesses. But on a sort of a pound for pound basis, just the average Israeli entrepreneur you meet is extraordinarily talented. And at the end of the day, this is simply about people who are, prepared to have a crack, to solve big problems, but there's a whole lot of peers for them to look at. And there's so many different case studies and there's so many different role models. And, the criticism, of course, of the Israeli tech industry, to the extent there was, 5 or 10 years ago, was as they were getting out too early, they were exiting, they were trying to sell to the Ciscos or the IBMs and sort of $50, $100 million exits. And that's clearly changed over the last 5 years or so. And it's a sort of a similar journey I think we're on in Australia, where the analogy to that is that I think too many of us, and certainly in our case when we started Seek, 18 years ago, we probably had a view that the best in the world were better than we were. We then met some of them and they weren't that overwhelming, and you sort of have a different perspective. But that kind of self-confidence to say, I'm actually going to solve a big problem, I'm going to solve it on a global basis. As Australians, sometimes we're almost embarrassed to sort of have that ambition and that level of self-confidence, frankly arrogance required. And we see that in Israel in spades, and so the quality of the deal flow that we're seeing in Israel, case in point is a company we invested in last week, Fiverr, is truly extraordinary. At the same time, we are absolutely passionate about what we're doing here, and we hope that we're going to take some learnings from Israel and be able to apply them here and make a small contribution to what's happening in the ecosystem here, because it's, the future of Australia is absolutely bound up in becoming a more innovative economy.
Thank you. Avi, so you've been in Australia 2 days?
It sounds like 2 months. Feels like 2 months.
Yeah. So you've been here 2 days, but I think that you've seen in 2 days and met in 2 days more than most of the people here. What would be your, 2 insights on what you've seen here and how we could improve those relations between the 2 ecosystems?
Yeah, I think what I've sensed here, certainly in the last 2 days, but also through my weekly meetings with Wyatt in the last month, I don't know, kind of happened that way.
You should be happy about that.
I'm so happy about that. Is really, I think, a keen desire not only to learn but also to implement. I mean, people are serious about this. This is not anecdotal, just a thought. Obviously, there's a very good foundation in terms of assets and capabilities and the desire to do that, which, as we all know, whatever our capacity is the first and most important piece of the success. So I think that's there. I think also the understanding of how much collaboration matters is something that exists, and that gives a very good foundation. I think, answering your first question or the title of this panel, everything that was discussed here is exactly what we need to do. It has to start with awareness. I mean, awareness is spread the news. And these are all great people on both sides, which are leaders and which can be the loudspeakers of these great capabilities that exist here. Because I think, I always say that from our experience, when you put smart, relevant people in the room together, good things will happen. They'll take it from there. I don't need to explain, to Paul or John where the opportunity is. They know about that. All we need to do from our side is to create those structures and systems that will enable through events and delegations and relationship with leading companies in Australia, like Telstra, and like Commonwealth Bank, with whom we just signed an agreement. I think it's through these relationships that you can really make the difference. And I think, and this is just a general comment, that we shouldn't limit ourselves to a specific model of engagement or to a specific industry. We've learned through our relationship with countries that sometimes new opportunities arise. And I'll just give very quickly an example which I think could be relevant for Australia as well. It's the example of Canada, with whom we have multiple relationships and structures, and we've worked extensively. And in many ways, the opportunity is similar, as well as the bridge, of course, to other markets. But the example I want to talk about is that once we expose the Israeli capabilities to Canada and vice versa, all of a sudden a new business around oil and gas and a new business around mining, both very relevant industries to Australia, all of a sudden were discovered for the Israeli audience, which knew nothing about this, but guess what? Had a lot of relevant technologies and know-how to serve the needs of those markets. So I think what we need to do on both sides is ask questions and then see how can we answer them together. And this was just one example of something that, quite honestly, wasn't necessarily on our radar when we started out, because we went after the usual suspects of cybersecurity and medical devices and so on. But once you start interacting with government, with investors, that's when the opportunities lie. That's when you start to have a more intimate dialogue and a more in-depth discussion of what are the opportunities.
Thank you, Avi. And that's a question to all the panel. What would you think the individual that, the people here in the room today could do beside writing a check to enhance the relations between Israel and Australia?
Don't belittle writing checks.
Andy, do you want to?
Well, look, I think, it's like anything in life. I think, you've got to get intimate with the opportunity, and it requires a degree of investment, because notwithstanding how important checks are, John, the reality is in the world there is an enormous amount of capital available today. That is not the constraint of most large organisations. It's not actually the constraint of many venture investing organisations. Capital is actually not the scarce resource. The scarce resource is time and the capability and the engagement to actually get intimate with the opportunities, to really understand what they are and actually how they can be applied and ultimately how they can be cultivated and commercialised. I sort of look at the world today in terms of from a technology innovation perspective, and technology innovation is democratised innovation moving forward. The barriers to innovation have come down so much because compute power at such a cheap price is so readily available across a very cheap distribution form via the internet that for large corporates such as Australia, this is something that we believe passionately, is that we're not going to find all of the answers. In fact, most of the answers are going to be outside of the organisation rather than inside of the organisation. And so the question is, how can we cultivate an environment where we can elicit and draw out those opportunities and create systems of incubation that actually nurture them and put support behind them, which, as I say, it's partly about money, but more than that, it's actually about the mentoring and the skills and the sort of analogy or the story I shared with our colleagues in China. It was, sure, we put a couple of $100 million in, but ultimately that's not what made the difference over the longer term. And so that's not going to happen without building relationships, getting intimate with the opportunities, spending a lot of time, a lot of face-to-face time with the entrepreneurs that are building on these opportunities. Mm-hmm. Paul?
John? Oh.
Sure.
Sorry. Just adding, I think, picking up themes that Andy talked about and Wyatt also previously. I think, most of the world's population lies between Australia and Israel. So if you sort of draw a stroke, so we're talking about this concept of a bridge between Australia and Israel, but obviously it's really important we have a few off-ramps, maybe a China off-ramp and an India off-ramp and a Southeast Asia off-ramp and Japan, etc. So, the reality is if you look at a sort of on a global basis, and not necessarily in technology, over the last 20 or 30 years, most companies that have focused on the Asian region have planted a regional headquarters in usually Singapore or Hong Kong, increasingly Singapore in the last 10 or 15 years. And so I think as Israeli companies increasingly focus on the East, the ability, and again, John picked up on some of these themes, as did Wyatt earlier. There is a kind of a very symbiotic relationship culturally, politically, in all sorts of different respects between Australia and Israel. So I think it makes perfect sense for Israelis to think about Australia as their launching pad for Asia. It makes absolute sense for Australians to be, all the things that Wyatt was doing last week or a couple of weeks ago with Marita and your delegation, and us spending a lot of time there and learning and talking and collaborating. As Andy says, capital is a relatively whatever the opposite of scarce is, plentiful resource. Too much capital is what got us into the GFC into the first place. So capital isn't our issue. It's intellectual capacity, it's innovation, it's collaboration. And I think the other element that we don't talk about enough is without wanting to put a sort of a political tone on this, the reality is that technological innovation is essentially the only thing that is protecting a democratic way of life. And it's not preordained that it's not Hollywood where the good guys win and the bad guys lose. The reality is the people who innovate, continually innovate and have a technological advantage are the guys who have won historically and the people who win in the future. And therefore, the innovation that's coming out of pluralistic democratic societies is incredibly important in terms of the future of our planet.
Thank you. I think John will add.
I think we have a desire to create the sort of broad-based collaboration, and I definitely agree that it's beyond capital, but I don't think we have the tools to do it. And I think that one of the problems that we're facing is that we come together in a conference like this, we meet people, we develop relationships, and then we go back to LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter.
Well though, John, it looked like.
Now, we, at our crowd, we're building a set of tools to try to, encourage our investors when they choose a company to actually somehow figure out a way to get involved. And this is not easy because we're bombarding our investors already every week with emails about deals and whatnot. And now we want to engage them in crowd building. But it seems to me that we're missing a whole software layer, in this relationship that allows people to source technology. I mean, I don't know how you guys picked 40 companies. Oh my God.
We did it.
You did. But the reality is that from a self-service standpoint, we simply in the government don't have the tools yet where a company could go in and find. I know that some of them are being built and Startup Nation Central and others are working. You guys are working.
The chief scientist is doing that.
And chief scientist, but we're still, I think, lacking a lot of this stuff so that people can, almost self-build their own missions and can hook up person to person with others, with companies. If they're looking for a cool technology in this, how do you do it? I mean, we all can't call
I'll come with a platform. You'll fund it.
Very much so. I mean, first of all, I'll use it. I'm committed to this because I think that this is the next step. Is how do you create technology tools that will enable this kind of collaboration on a person-to-person level, on a corporation-to-corporation level. And it's amazing. We have Salesforce management. We have service management. We don't have innovation management software. And I think a lot of that is going to be developed coming forward.
Absolutely. I just think that is such a good in. There is very, very practical things that we can do to do exactly what you're talking about, and also in a very physical sense, ensure that we have the circulation between our people, our ideas, our capital between our two countries. And there does need to be mystery and excitement in the world, but I would just say watch this space because I think there's some very practical things that we can do to go to your actual question as well around what else we can do in this room, I think we have to be deeply optimistic about the opportunity between our two countries collaborating on innovation, and we need to talk about it. You know, one of the things that I find very frustrating as a politician is it's good to have this conversation in this room, but there should be a conversation at the dinner table around Israeli dinner rooms and Australian dining tables. So the more that everyone in this room can proactively, aggressively go out and promote what we both achieve out of this, how we can change the world for the better by collaborating together, and just do it in the most overtly optimistic way. I mean, we are so cynical as human beings, and I think to talk up that opportunity is a big part of this, and we can all play a part in that.
Thank you, White. So just to follow up on that, we are in the process of negotiating a number of agreements between Israel and Australia. We are negotiating an R&D cooperation agreement between the Office of the Chief Scientist and with the great support of Wyatt Roy and the ministry. We've signed a multinational cooperation agreement with CBA yesterday, and we will hopefully sign in the coming months a taxation treaty. So I think that we're building a nice platform for cooperation between the countries, more on the government to government or government to G2B level. But really, I think that one of the outcome of this discussion is that we need to find a really good platform to bring the companies and really the ecosystem from both sides. So first of all, I can announce that the bridge will be an annual event, and we'll have another, and we'll have more opportunities for that. But any other idea from the panel?
I would just say, watch this space. You know, give me a few weeks. There needs to be.
Okay.
You know, we're in government. I can't give everything else away. But you know, Christopher's heading off to Israel very shortly, and beyond the R&D treaty, the double taxation agreement, the bridge event, I think there is a few more tools in the toolkit that we can work together on that really partners with the private sector. So watch this space.
Excellent. We're very excited to hear that. Avi? Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I can say, I think the agreements are important not for the sake of the agreements. They're a platform for a structured dialogue. That's where the values lie. It creates an ongoing activities to support the agreement as well as the dialogue. Excuse me. What I wanted to say is that we should generate and celebrate the early success stories. Nothing speaks louder than success. Nothing. For the entrepreneurs, the researchers, the investors, success speaks louder than anything else. So the more we generate and also, as I've said, publish the success stories, people will follow. People will follow. The opportunity is here, and I think the more people realize it, they will follow. The most precious resource for any of us in this room is time, actually. It's not money. It's not about the money. It's deciding where, as a CEO, you're going to spend your time, or as an investor, you're going to give your attention span. And I think the more we reflect the opportunity which we all feel is real, more people will answer the call and follow us.
Thank you, Avi. Andy, would you like maybe to share with us your experience with Zimperium, an Israeli cybersecurity startup that Telstra has invested in recently?
Yes, well, as you can imagine, cybersecurity is obviously for Australia's largest telecommunications provider and the operator of basically all of the fixed networks in Australia. It's a pretty important issue, and I think it's an issue that's significant more broadly in the sense that one of the things that needs to exist is confidence in the infrastructure in the system, which is actually the infrastructure of innovation. And I think it's important not just in Australia but internationally. And of course, the extent or the incidence of cyber activity is increasing very rapidly. But in the end, cybercrime is just crime. Cyber espionage is just espionage, and hacktivism is just activism. These things are no different. They just happen to be manifesting themselves in a digital world rather than a physical world. And cybersecurity, it's about both technology, people, and process. But there is some enormous talent and some enormous capabilities in Israel in terms of technology that can make a fundamental difference. And so we have been investing in this space. We we invested in a company called Imperium, which specialises in cybersecurity in devices, because, of course, as mobility has increased, as the number of mobile phones in the world continues to increase, that is extending the perimeter of accessibility into the network. And of course, as we move forward into the world of the Internet of Things, that's just going to extend further. So actually having that level of security at the perimeter is crucially important. And so Israel, both in terms of the company that we've invested in, Imperium, where we own about 15%, but just also in terms of a source of technology innovation in cyberspace is crucially important. And of course, the whole ecosystem has given you a great advantage in that regard. But it's interesting, over the last 3 months I've hosted roundtables in Australia, in London, with CEOs and with chairmen of companies, and it's quite interesting is that whilst cybersecurity, the risk and both the frameworks that can be used and the technology that can be implemented to address it are quite well canvassed and quite well known at the CISO level or the CIO level, at the board level, at the chairman of the audit committee level, at the CEO level, at the chairman of the company level. It is still a very a nascent area, and boards are really struggling with how to get their heads around this. So I think it's a crucially important area. It's an area that we'll be investing and spending a lot of time on, and Israel will be a clear area and source of talent for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for participating in this panel. It was very insightful, and certainly a very good panel for closing the event today. We still have an address from Andy Penn that will close the discussion today. And I think we've got lots to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.